if the taxi driver was gonna go and drop me off in some abandoned place and take advantage of me. Mind you, this was before like ride-hailing apps such as like, Grab and Kojo and all of that came about.
Well, it's definitely not as safe as Singapore. Yeah, not even close. Based on my cursory knowledge of Singapore, I would say they treat crime more seriously. You're not going to tolerate foolishness.
I would say that it has been relatively safe. I mean, considering that I have been born and pretty much lived here most of my life, I've had the privilege of actually not having to worry about safety when I go out alone, or coming back late at night, or sometimes even in the wee hours of the morning. So for example, when I was in my early 20s and I used to go clubbing and coming back at like 3, 4 a.m. in the morning and having to take a cab back home, I honestly didn't even have to think or worry about if the taxi driver was gonna go and drop me off in some abandoned place and take advantage of me. Mind you, this was before like ride-hailing apps such as like, Grab and Kojo and all of that came about. So this was like the old school taxis. And yeah, I didn't really have to worry about it. And more often than not, I would actually fall asleep in the taxi. And of course, time to time, I do wake up and like check my surroundings. Probably the only thing that I would have to worry about is being charged, and like more than usual, because they would probably go a longer route. But yeah, so that's one instance. And also, as a runner, I do like to go for runs and walks early in the morning, sometimes as early as like 5, 6 a.m., before the sun comes up, and then there's not many people. And I don't have to, I've never really felt like I was being followed or watched, or, you know what I mean? Not to say that these things does not happen in Singapore, because we have had cases, of course. Unfortunately, but fortunately, it's not like something that happens a lot of times. And I would also say that that's kind of thanks to having the government having lots of CCTVs placed around. It's kind of like a 50-50 thing, like, people are worried about their privacy, but at the same time, in terms of security, is actually something that's really helpful. For example, let's say a exit out of an MRT station easily has about like 6 to 10 CCTVs placed around. They're not in your face, but like, if you look up, you would see them around. There's and for another thing, there's also probably, I would say, that there might have been a lot of cases recently of people taking upskirt photos and molestations. Why do I say that? It's mainly because up to recently, there has been announcements in like MRT stations talking about it and saying that it's a crime and you can get jailed. And yeah, so previously it was only just like you would see posters of it being displayed around, but now that it's kind of like people are talking about it and there's an announcement and like, things to remind you not to do that. I would say that probably it has been a rising number or so. So yeah, but overall, living in Singapore as a woman, it has been safe. I've had the privilege also to travel around the world and hear people's stories, and honestly, there is something different about being in Singapore. And although I do not travel to places that are not safe for women, but there is a different kind of safety in being in Singapore as compared to other countries, other developed countries, I would say. But yeah, so that's my take on it. Thank you.
not to say that every place is extremely dangerous, but there's so many different angles. Besides mugging, there's also mass, then the protests, and then I guess, but depending on which part of the world you from, or your ethnicity or whatever, the prospect of police brutality or finding yourself unfairly at the mercy of the justice system. There's so many different types of violence. Yeah, so what I would recommend is, what I recommend is staying away from hot spots. Yes, that's somewhat of an effective way of minimizing the chance of being caught up in some kind of violent situation you don't want to be in. And if you're in the city, the big city, to like travel in groups or with a companion, especially if you're a stranger, somebody who's familiar with the environment and will know how to navigate, have a better understanding how to navigate and avoid certain pitfalls. Like how to recognize, like if you're in New York City, how to recognize a gang of thieves. You know what I mean? Because it's not like every black teenager is a thief, but you know what I mean? Yeah, you'll be able to spot certain things. It's imperative. The police in most localities, if you call the police or whatever, they'll respond within minutes. But the reason I put it so low nonetheless is because at the end of the day, for instance, like I remember a couple of years ago, some teenager from Australia, he got in Memphis or one of those cities down there, the New Orleans or wherever, and it's like he got jumped or something. They stole his bike and he got jumped. And imagine having to go and tell his mom, that this is what happened to your son. Like nobody wants to hear, nobody wants to receive that kind of news. So that's why I put it at a 1. Not that it happens to everybody, but you definitely wouldn't want it happening to you. And, violence is it's normal. It's a normal form of conflict resolution. Yeah, in terms of it's normal. And the reason I could say that is because now I've lived some years in a society that isn't like that. So now I could more clearly see the difference that, it's conflict. There's a way to get, some cultures you get angry and you resolve it non-violently, and some cultures you resolve it violently. And that's that. For instance, like I was telling you, there was recently the story in the news where some dude in the Bronx, I think, he murdered a girl for rejecting his advances. And that kind of stuff, it more or less happens everywhere. But in the US, if you're in New York and you hear that, it probably wouldn't even be like news per se. Yeah, it's more like you feel sorry for homegirl, but it's like, you need to be more on guard. Almost like blaming the victim in a way. Yeah. I think it's all of the above. For instance, recently here in Ghana, there was some dudes, in Ho, some dudes, 2 dudes and some girl, they robbed some guy of his phone. And they said when they robbed the guy of the phone, they pulled a screwdriver or something on him. Yeah. And they got 19 years total. Yeah, in the US, you probably, especially in New York City now, you probably wouldn't even go to jail for that. Yeah, so I think that's part of it, criminal justice, or justice for criminals. You know what I'm saying? That's how the system is there. You have people, not saying that Diddy is guilty, but just using Diddy as an example. You have people fighting on behalf of criminal, and sometimes it works. And I think also the socialization of the society, the content of the media is very violent. And then also the history of the country is very violent. So yeah, all of the above. poverty, but it's also a society. Like take UFC for instance, the UFC, United Fighter Championship. Yeah, those dudes ain't poor. Yeah, but they out there kicking ass. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, it's a good thing to be a macho in American society. Yeah. Females all. It's good for everybody to be macho. But a lot of people in the U.S. live by prayer. Yeah, you just pray for for instance, there's some case I was recently reading about, I don't know how, but it's like some dude, Uber driver, he picked up some drunk lady, I think in Washington, and he took her to the forest. And the only reason they were able to I think he may have murdered her, I don't remember, but the reason they were able to, the only reason they were able to find them is because of the phone pings. And sometimes you be reading these stories, a lady will be riding the train in New York and some guy will debate on her. Yeah, if you could imagine that. Yeah, it's that kind of sick going on, and it's so it a lot of women they out there on their own, but it isn't ideal. Well, it's definitely not as safe as Singapore. Yeah, not even close. Based on my cursory knowledge of Singapore, I would say they treat crime more seriously. Yeah, and once again, going back to Ghana, I see that to some extent that works. You're not going to tolerate foolishness. That could deter a lot of people. So I think that's probably at the I don't know what's on their TV, what they watch on TV or whatever. And I remember, the high school I went to, it was tradition, it was like tradition among certain segments of the student population that after school, and especially on the weekends, like on a Friday, dudes will go out wilding. You know what I mean? Mugging okay. And I remember once, this is one of the wildest days of my life. We visited this other high school. And oh my gosh, we visited this high school, and some dudes from the high school, some of them were students, and some of them were like their homies. They ambushed another student. Yeah, the guy totally didn't see it coming, and they beat out of him. Yeah, and so then I remember, that set off everybody started going wild. So I remember there was this girl walking. She was wearing gold. Those days they had the door knockers. Yeah, she was wearing gold, and somebody grabbed her. She was like our age, she was a teenager, and one of the boys grabbed her and was spinning her, spinning her around, and while she was spinning, some other guys were snatching her jewelry off. And in hindsight, I guess it could have been worse because at least they didn't physically assault her, Yeah, the police, okay, they weren't around, and now that, in hindsight, I would probably say they weren't around intentionally. Yeah, because in those kind of settings, there's going to inevitably be violence. Yeah, so they probably were, some of the police, they think, and I don't blame them to some extent, they're not from the hood, especially back in those days, and they have families to go home to.